"Security, please escort her from 2A." The words hit harder than turbulence. Samantha Williams blinked once slowly, then closed her laptop as two uniformed men approached. Around her, first-class passengers watched in awkward silence. Some smirked. One man, a white businessman in his 50s, actually smiled. She knew his name already. Richard Blackstone. She'd seen it on the complaint log the moment she boarded. He pointed smugly at her seat like it was stolen property. "Finally," he muttered. What he didn't know, what no one in that luxury cabin understood, was that Samantha Williams wasn't just another black woman flying solo. She was the reason this flight existed, and in 5 minutes, the same airline that had just downgraded her for the comfort of a prejudiced passenger would receive a call from corporate headquarters confirming a full-scale leadership transition. Samantha wouldn't just reclaim her seat. She'd own every seat on the aircraft and every decision that came with it. But she didn't raise her voice. Not yet. Because power doesn't announce itself. It lands when it's ready. Before we dive into this stunning story of justice, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the most satisfying revenge arc you'll ever see take flight. The sharp sting of humiliation on Flight 447 wasn't the first time Samantha Williams had felt out of place in a seat she earned. It started long before that. Long before the Armani suit. Long before the Harvard diploma. Long before anyone called her ma'am with anything resembling respect. She grew up in the noisy upstairs apartment of a rundown brick building in Detroit's West Side. Above a laundromat, behind a liquor store, across from a factory that never reopened after '92. At night, the walls shook with sirens. During the day, they shook from the thunder of her mother's exhaustion. Diana Williams, single mother. 3 jobs. No shortcuts. By dawn, she was stacking cans at a grocery store. By noon, she served greasy food in a diner. By nightfall, she scrubbed toilets in downtown office buildings no one thanked her for entering. Yet, every night, without fail, she opened a book, and she made Samantha read. "Education is your ticket out. Baby girl," Diana would whisper. "No one can take your mind from you, no matter how they look at you." That whisper outlasted every insult Samantha ever heard. School wasn't easy. Her district was one of the most underfunded in the state. Textbooks had duct tape on their spines. History class skipped entire decades. Science labs had no chemicals, just charts taped to the walls. But Samantha made the library her second home. From Maya Angelou to Malcolm Gladwell, from microeconomics to metaphors, she read like her life depended on it. Because it did. By junior year, one person noticed Mrs. Patterson, the school guidance counselor. She'd seen thousands of students. But Samantha. She doesn't just read to learn. She told the principal, she reads to lead. It was Patterson who helped Samantha fill out scholarship applications, who coached her through SAT anxiety, who fought for her spot at a summer business camp run by Harvard alumni. That summer, for the first time, Samantha stepped foot on a college campus that didn't smell like mold or cafeteria food. She saw what she could become. And nothing was ever the same. The day her Harvard acceptance letter arrived, Samantha didn't cry. She walked straight to her mother's job and placed the letter on the lunch counter next to a plate of cold fries. Diana didn't cry either. She whispered, "I told you, they can't stop a mind that's on fire." Harvard wasn't welcoming. The questions began before orientation ended. You're from where you must be on full aid. Huh. What sport got you in? Study groups left her out. Professors raised their eyebrows at her last name. She learned to spot the dismissive smirks when she answered questions too confidently. But she also learned something else. They expected her to flinch. So she didn't. Instead, she studied harder than anyone else, closed the library each night, taped her mother's mantra to her dorm wall, "Turn your pain into power." By graduation, she wasn't just a student. She was a strategy machine. She didn't just survive Harvard. She dominated it. The first job offer came from a boutique consulting firm in Chicago. Mid-tier, mostly white, always skeptical. Her first client presentation, she was asked to wait in the lobby. The client assumed she was the assistant. She smiled, delivered the presentation anyway, won the contract. And then her white colleague took the credit. That happened again. And again, until the day she led a merger for a major healthcare provider. And the client CEO gray suit, $10,000 watch, told her, "Be a doll and grab us some coffee." She didn't grab coffee. She grabbed her purse. And she left, that night, in her tiny apartment. She started something. Meridian Industries. No investors, no backing. Just a borrowed laptop, a prepaid phone, and a mind too dangerous to bet against. Her first client, a failing soul food restaurant in Flint. The owner reminded her of her mom. Hard-working, overlooked, exhausted. Samantha saved it from foreclosure in 90 days. Word spread. One restaurant turned into 5. 5 into 15. Soon, Fortune 500 firms were knocking on her door. 15 years later, she led a team of 200, had her face on Forbes, was called the Turnaround Queen. But no title erased the moments that shaped her. So when the opportunity to buy Pinnacle Airlines surfaced, an $800 million move that would make her one of the few black women in history to own a commercial airline, Samantha didn't hesitate. She saw it clearly. This wasn't just an acquisition. It was airspace, owned, controlled, rewritten. And that's why she booked Flight 447, to test her soon-to-be airline service, to sit anonymously in 2A, to measure the distance between policy and perception. But she forgot one thing. America never asks for ID before delivering disrespect. It just acts. The dramatic high point came the moment Richard Blackstone boarded. Samantha barely looked up. But he looked at her like she'd stolen his seat, his inheritance, and his identity all at once. He didn't know her name, didn't recognize her face, didn't see a CEO. All he saw was a black woman in 2A, and to him, that was all he needed. Richard Blackstone didn't need facts. He didn't want confirmation. He wanted removal. The moment he spotted Samantha in seat 2A, something old and ugly stirred inside him. That mix of entitlement and subtle contempt, a cocktail passed down in mahogany boardrooms and country club brunches for generations. To him, first class wasn't just a seat. It was a filter, a dividing line between people who earned the world and people who didn't deserve it. And when he saw Samantha seated comfortably, dressed in a navy Armani suit, reviewing documents with practiced ease, that filter failed. So he did what men like him always do when the world doesn't look the way they expect. He complained. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into the aisle like he owned the plane. Jessica Chen, a sharp, composed flight attendant in her late 20s, looked up. She'd worked for Pinnacle Airlines for 3 years, long enough to decode tone instantly. And this man, he wasn't asking. He was preparing a takedown. "There seems to be a mistake," Blackstone said, gesturing subtly toward Samantha. "That woman in 2A. I don't believe she belongs in this cabin." Jessica blinked. "Sir, I think you should check if she was upgraded by mistake. First class isn't typically, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but—" "You just did," Jessica thought, but she kept her professional mask on. "I'll check her boarding pass, sir." Jessica approached Samantha with a tight smile. "Ma'am, may I see your ticket? Please." Samantha didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She knew this dance, the choreography of suspicion, the routine of random checks. But she also knew the stakes. When black women get angry in public, the story changes. She opened her wallet and handed Jessica her first-class ticket, along with her license. Jessica looked closely, paid in full. Seat 2A. Name match. No upgrades. Samantha Williams. Everything was perfect. Everything official. But by the time Jessica returned to Blackstone, the damage had begun. Several other first-class passengers, white, wealthy, watching, leaned in to listen. The coded message had already spread. "There's someone out of place. She has a valid ticket," Jessica said quietly. "No error." Blackstone nodded slowly, then said louder for the cabin to hear. "I just find it hard to believe. People like her, they don't usually pay full fare, unless it's a charity situation or something." That was it. The air changed. First-class passengers went still. A few blinked in discomfort. Most just turned away. But Samantha heard it all. Every single word. It wasn't anger that filled her. It was fire wrapped in velvet. She looked up, not at Jessica, not at Blackstone, but directly at the seatback in front of her. She breathed in and kept typing. Jessica hesitated, then stepped away, but Blackstone wasn't finished. He turned to a white couple seated nearby. "I mean, really?" He whispered just loud enough. "We all know the type of people who fly up here." They nodded. Margaret Stevens, a retired schoolteacher from the suburbs, whispered to her husband. "He does have a point." The dramatic high point came moments later when Patricia Wells' supervisor, senior gate agent, 20 years in the industry, walked down the aisle with tight lips and forced calm. Jessica had reported the passenger concern. Blackstone had invoked status Platinum Elite, donor, longtime flyer. Wells approached Samantha with the practiced tone of someone who had done this before. "Ma'am, I need to verify your documents again." Samantha turned slowly. "I already showed them to your flight attendant." "I understand," Wells said, reaching out, "but we've received several complaints from nearby passengers." There it was, the magic phrase. Complaints, as if prejudice became policy once it passed the quorum. Samantha handed over her ID again. Wells examined it like she expected to find counterfeit ink. Then she turned to the front of the cabin and motioned toward the galley. A security officer, Marcus Johnson, a tall black man in a crisp navy uniform, appeared. He walked down the aisle, eyes reading the room. He saw Wells, saw Samantha, saw the smirking Blackstone, and he understood everything. Immediately, "Ma'am," he said softly, "I need to escort you to another seat." Samantha didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't call for lawyers. Yet, she stood, gathered her laptop, nodded once. Then she walked down that aisle like royalty through a kingdom that forgot her crown, past every face that refused to meet her eyes, past every person who nodded along with Blackstone 5 minutes ago. To seat 23F4, between a crying baby and a man with garlic breath. From 2A to the back of the plane, and no one stopped it. Not yet, but what they didn't know was that 30,000 feet wasn't high enough to escape what was coming. Because in 45 minutes, when they touched down in Chicago, she would be their boss. And the entire plane was about to learn. Power doesn't always come in loud suits. Sometimes it rides in silence and strikes at landing. The aisle felt longer than a runway. Samantha walked it with the grace of a queen stripped of her crown, but not her poise, not her power. Every step from 2A to 23F was a step through history, through pain, through memory, through the centuries-old choreography of removal. No one spoke. No one helped, not even the ones who silently disapproved. Because silence has always been discrimination's favorite accomplice, Samantha passed rows of quiet passengers. Some offered apologetic glances. Others looked away, suddenly fascinated by tray tables or in-flight magazines. A few, like Margaret Stevens, held their heads high, still convinced they were right. By the time she reached the back of the plane, her dignity was intact, but her fury boiled just beneath the surface. Marcus, the security officer, escorted her like a man walking beside a mirror, seeing his own compromise reflected in her composure. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She nodded, but didn't answer. Because now wasn't the time for emotion. It was time for evidence. She sat down between a red-faced businessman and a crying infant. Seat 23F, economy middle seat, the one no one wants, and she opened her phone. First record. She took photos, captured faces, logged timestamps. She made note of Blackstone's seat, Patricia Wells's name badge, and Jessica Chen's uncertain expression. Then, she opened her email to David Chen, General Counsel, Meridian Industries. Subject: in-flight incident. Documentation in progress. Body: experiencing discriminatory incident with target company. Please prepare legal framework for immediate escalation post-acquisition. Maintain discretion. Meanwhile, in first class. Richard Blackstone stretched out in 2A. His wine glass glistened in the cabin light. He had no idea the woman he'd removed had just triggered a legal and corporate tsunami. He joked with the man in 2B. "Had to handle a situation earlier," he said, swirling his wine. "There was a ticketing mistake. You know how that happens sometimes." The man chuckled. "Yeah, this airline's gone downhill." Blackstone nodded. It was the last laugh he'd have for a long, long time. Back in 23F, Samantha's phone buzzed. It was Monica, her assistant. Final acquisition paperwork submitted. Press conference scheduled for 3 p.m. CNN confirmed attendance. Welcome aboard. Boss? Samantha allowed herself the faintest smile. Her humiliation wasn't a defeat. It was now Exhibit A in the biggest restructuring Pinnacle Airlines had ever seen. As the plane reached cruising altitude, murmurs spread through economy. A young black boy named Marcus, coincidentally sharing the same name as the security officer, sat across the aisle. His mother, Angela, recognized Samantha. She had read about her in Essence magazine just weeks before. "You're Samantha Williams," she whispered. Samantha looked up. "I am." Angela looked stunned. "They made you move." Samantha nodded once. The boy's eyes went wide. "You're the lady from the magazine. You help companies." Samantha's smile returned genuine this time. "That's right. And today, I'm helping this one, in a very different way." In the next row, businessman Tom Rodriguez began quietly texting his wife. "The woman they kicked out of 2A, it's Samantha Williams. She's buying the airline. I saw her face in a pitch deck last month." The story began to spread like wildfire through economy. Phones came out. Google searches spiked. Quiet passengers turned into angry murmurers. The woman squeezed into the economy middle seat wasn't just any traveler. She was their new CEO, and she had been humiliated by her own airline. Meanwhile, Jessica Chen stood frozen in the galley, staring at her phone. She had searched Samantha's name out of curiosity. The results hit like turbulence. CEO of Meridian Industries. Harvard MBA. Fortune 500 leader set to acquire Pinnacle Airlines for $800 million. Jessica's heart dropped. She wasn't just complicit. She had helped humiliate her future boss. She rushed to find Patricia Wells. "Did you know who she is?" Jessica whispered. Panic rising. "No," Wells said dismissively. "I don't care if she's the Pope. She caused unrest. I followed policy." Jessica backed away because Wells didn't understand. But Jessica did. This was more than policy. This was a career ender. The dramatic high point came just before descent. Captain Robert Thompson's voice crackled over the intercom. At 58, Thompson had flown for Pinnacle for over 2 decades. Known for professionalism, never dramatics. But today, he had been informed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we land, I have a special announcement." The cabin fell silent. Passengers looked up. "Today, we are honored to fly with a very distinguished guest, Ms. Samantha Williams, CEO of Meridian Industries, who has just completed the acquisition of Pinnacle Airlines." Gasps, shocked silence. "And then, she is now the new owner of this airline." Seat 23F exploded in cheers. Economy class rose in applause. "Marcus," the boy shouted. "That's the nice lady. She owns the plane. First class." First class froze. Blackstone's wine glass slipped, shattered. Margaret Stevens dropped her phone. Jessica covered her mouth. And Patricia Wells, she turned white. Samantha stood slowly, not to gloat, not to retaliate, but to rise. Because justice had arrived, and this time, she was the one giving the orders. Samantha didn't rush to the front. She let the applause swell behind her like waves. Let the murmurs from economy ripple forward through the cabin like truth finally catching up with rumor. Every step she took from seat 23 back toward first class was different than the walk that preceded it. The walk down had been quiet resignation. This one, calculated redemption. The first person to rise and make way was Angela, the mother of young Marcus. She stood and nodded with tears in her eyes. "Make them remember you," she whispered. Then came Tom Rodriguez. He stood and saluted her with a respectful nod. "Let 'em feel it." And finally, "Marcus, you're gonna change everything, right?" he asked. Samantha paused, crouched beside him, and said, "Not just this plane, the whole sky." He beamed as Samantha walked forward. Phones captured her every step. The internet was already ablaze. Black woman removed from first class, turns out she owns the airline. CEO walks from coach to command. Justice on flight 447. Every headline was writing itself. But the story wasn't over. She stepped past the curtain and entered the domain that had expelled her. Jessica Chen met her first. Still pale, still trembling. "Ms. Williams," she started. But Samantha raised a hand. "We'll speak after landing." Jessica nodded rapidly and stepped aside. Samantha turned to face 2A. Richard Blackstone stared up at her, the blood draining from his face. He was still in her seat, still holding the armrest like it might protect him. Samantha didn't blink. "Keep the seat," she said evenly. "I think we both know who really belongs in it." The passengers nearby were silent, uncomfortable, and then someone clapped. Just once, then again. Then others joined. It wasn't just support. It was awakening. Patricia Wells appeared from the galley. Wrinkled uniform, eyes wide, panic in her every motion. "Ms. Williams, I want to sincerely apologize for..." Samantha didn't even flinch. "Save it." The cabin went still. "You didn't check a ticket. You checked a skin color." Wells tried to protest. There were passenger concerns. "No," Samantha cut in. "There was one concern. One entitled man who said I didn't belong. And you agreed. Without question. Without policy. Without principle." The dramatic high point came next. Samantha stepped forward, pulled her phone from her bag, and dialed. "Monica," she said calmly into the receiver. "Yes. Connect me with Pinnacle HR immediately." A pause. Then she turned to face the entire first-class cabin. "My name is Samantha Williams. I'm the new owner of Pinnacle Airlines." Gasps again. I was removed from my seat because of discrimination that was ignored, then reinforced, then escalated. Wells stepped forward. Desperate now. "We didn't know." "That's the problem," Samantha snapped. "You didn't want to know. And now everyone will." She turned to Jessica. "You'll be reassigned pending review. You showed weakness, but I saw regret. You may have a future." Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. To Wells, "You're terminated. Effective immediately." Silence. Then, applause. Economy cheered. First class looked down. Blackstone slunk into his seat, visibly trembling. "I'll sue," he muttered. "You already did," Samantha replied coolly. "You sued your own reputation. And lost." Captain Thompson stepped out of the cockpit. "Ms. Williams," he said, extending his hand. "I had no idea. You weren't expected to," she replied, shaking his hand. "But you made the announcement. That took courage." "Anything I can do?" "Yes," Samantha said. "Land this flight safely. The rest I'll handle on the ground." She returned to 2A not to sit, but to face the cabin. To every person who watched injustice unfold and said nothing, remember this moment. She paused. To every company who protects its image more than its people, understand this fallout. And to every young girl, every underrepresented voice who's ever been told to sit in the back, she looked back toward 23F. Know that one day, you'll walk forward too, not to reclaim a seat, but to own the whole plane. The cabin was silent. Not out of fear, but respect. True, earned, seismic respect, and Flight 447 continued its descent toward a world that would never look the same. The wheels of Flight 447 kissed the Chicago runway with perfect precision. But inside the cabin, nothing felt smooth. First class was frozen. Economy was electrified. And somewhere between the two sat a legacy in the making. Captain Thompson's voice echoed through the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to O'Hare International. Local time is 2:42 p.m. and as mentioned earlier, we are honored to have Ms. Samantha Williams, the new owner of Pinnacle Airlines, on board today." He paused, then added, "Let today be a reminder. Treat every passenger with dignity, because you never know who's writing your future." Applause erupted louder this time. Passengers in economy stood and clapped. Young Marcus pressed his face to the window, then turned to his mom. "She really owns it, doesn't she?" Angela smiled. "Every piece of it. Baby." Samantha remained seated in 2A, serene and composed, scanning her phone. A flood of messages, press pings, and executive emails had landed within seconds of touchdown. CNN, MSNBC, and the Wall Street Journal wanted statements. Pinnacle's board had emailed congratulations. And Monica, she sent a 3-word message. "Stage is yours." Patricia Wells, still pale and stunned, stood by the galley, waiting. She hadn't moved since the termination. Jessica Chen, meanwhile, quietly helped economy passengers deplane her actions, calm, her eyes focused. Redemption was still possible. She intended to earn it. Blackstone tried to slither off the aircraft without notice. Too late. Phones were pointed. Footage of his smug face during the confrontation had already gone viral. Entitled banker kicks black CEO from seat, then learns she owns the airline. One clip had 1.2 million views in an hour. Another added sound effects. Memes followed. He moved down the jet bridge as if pursued, because he was. By consequences, at Gate 14, the tarmac had transformed into a media swarm. Microphones, flashbulbs, tripods, reporters from every major outlet pressed against the ropes. They didn't just want a quote, they wanted a reckoning. Samantha walked slowly through the boarding door. Passengers and employees had formed a corridor on either side. Some bowed their heads, others saluted with proud nods. Many just whispered, "Thank you," at the threshold. She paused, turned back. and saw young Marcus watching from the window. He raised his hand, tiny, hopeful. Strong? She raised hers in return, and stepped into the storm. The dramatic high point came at the press conference. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Williams, how do you feel? Were you humiliated? Will you press charges? Is the airline liable for discrimination?" Samantha stood behind the podium. Calm, unshaken, she scanned the room and began. "Today, I boarded a flight as a passenger. I was removed from my seat not because of a ticketing error, but because of a perception error. Certain passengers assumed I didn't belong. Airline staff complied. And what followed was a familiar humiliation that far too many people face daily. The difference today was that I had leverage." She paused. The room leaned in. But this is not about revenge. It's about reform. Pinnacle Airlines will become the safest, most inclusive carrier in the world. Not just because I say so, but because we will design it that way, she announced. An independent diversity oversight board, public reporting on passenger complaints, required anti-bias training for all staff, real consequences for discrimination. Then she ended with, "From this day forward, every seat will be protected, not just by ticket class, but by principle." The room erupted. Even journalists clapped. Backstage, Monica waited with a copy of the finalized acquisition documents. She held them out. Samantha took the pen and signed the final page. Just like that. The airline, every route, every crew, every gate belonged to her. That night, headlines swept the nation. Black CEO removed from seat now. She runs the airline. Justice lands at 33,000 feet. Samantha Williams reshapes aviation forever. But for Samantha, it wasn't about headlines. It was about Marcus and the millions like him who needed to see that dignity doesn't get checked at the gate. It flies, first class. 2 days after Flight 447, Samantha sat at the head of a gleaming obsidian table inside Pinnacle Airlines' Chicago headquarters. Around her sat the company's top brass former board members, division heads, legal advisors, PR strategists. Most had stayed silent during the acquisition. Some had sent congratulatory texts after the press conference. Now, they were all here, buttoned up, careful-eyed, and clearly uncomfortable. None of them had ever answered to someone like her. A man cleared his throat. Robert Lancaster, interim CO, mid-60s, gray suit, face tight with forced civility. "Ms. Williams," he began, "while we recognize what occurred on Flight 447 was unfortunate, I hope we're not overreacting. It may have been an isolated incident." Samantha didn't blink. She tapped the stack of folders in front of her. One incident she repeated. She opened the top folder. "This is a passenger complaint filed last December. Black woman. First class. Removed because a concerned traveler claimed she was lost." Second folder. March. Latino man. Business class. Denied boarding despite valid documentation. Third folder. June. Muslim woman asked to remove headscarf before being cleared for gate entry. She paused. "Shall I continue?" Silence. Samantha stood, walking slowly around the table, her voice even. "This company doesn't have an incident problem. It has a culture problem." She stopped behind Lancaster, and culture starts at the top. He shifted in his chair. Jessica Chen's name came up next. She failed to uphold protocol, said someone at the table. She was complicit, said another. Samantha raised a hand. She was scared. She said, and she admitted it. That makes her more qualified than most of the people in this room. Some looked offended. Others looked impressed. Complicity is forgivable. Silence is curable. But willful blindness. She turned to Lancaster again. That's a resignation. The dramatic high point came next. Monica stepped into the boardroom, carrying a sleek case, and placed it before Samantha. Inside were 10 bound volumes labeled Project Equiflight. Samantha handed each executive a copy. "This is our future," she said. "A complete restructuring of customer experience, training, and accountability." She let the words sink in. Mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, a real-time complaint tracking dashboard, quarterly equity audits made public, a customer dignity task force, and the crown jewel, the passenger bill of respect. A signed contract between the airline and its flyers. "This isn't a campaign," Samantha continued. "It's a contract with every person who sets foot on our aircraft. If they fly with us, they fly with protection." One exec, Linda Graves, head of HR, asked the question on everyone's mind. "How will this impact revenue?" Samantha smiled. "Let me show you." She clicked a remote. The screen lit up with metrics from social media coverage, stock impact since the announcement, and booking trends. Pinnacle Airlines had experienced a 400% surge in bookings in 48 hours. Corporate clients requesting long-term contracts citing the company's new values, a 12-point bump in stock price. And most telling, over 15,000 handwritten thank you messages from customers who had faced discrimination and now felt seen. One message flashed across the screen. "Your dignity became ours. Thank you for fighting for it." Even the skeptics in the room couldn't argue with the numbers. Lancaster exhaled, his resistance wilting under the proof. "All right," he muttered. "We move forward." Samantha looked him in the eye. "You don't move forward. You step aside." The room froze. Samantha slid a folder across the table. "Your severance package. Generous. Considering your silence." Lancaster stared at it, then slowly stood. He adjusted his jacket, nodded once to the room, and walked out. No one stopped him. Because no one could argue with a woman holding both the receipts and the reins. As the board meeting adjourned, Monica leaned in. "David Chen just got off the phone with the FAA. They want you to consult on national airline standards." Samantha nodded. "Good. Tell them this isn't just a Pinnacle problem. It's a national altitude issue." Monica smiled. Altitude. Samantha. "How we treat people at 30,000 feet says everything about who we are on the ground." That evening, Samantha returned to her office. The desk was untouched. The chair still bore the plastic wrap from the previous owner. She sat, finally alone, opened the window, and watched as a Pinnacle jet took off into the gold-soaked sky. She didn't feel pride. She felt responsibility. Because power isn't about claiming a seat. It's about redesigning the cabin so no one else ever gets removed. By week's end, the ripples from Flight 447 had become waves crashing across corporate America, public consciousness, and the deeply shaken corridors of Pinnacle Airlines. Samantha didn't chase headlines. They chased her. CNN named her CEO of the moment. Time magazine called her the face of corporate reckoning. The New York Times ran a front-page headline. She was removed from her seat. Now she's piloting reform. Even Forbes, where Samantha had already graced the cover, ran a follow-up titled, "What Happens When the Turnaround Queen Owns the Sky?" Inside Pinnacle, the fallout was immediate. The legal department received over 700 emails from current and former passengers, each detailing their own moment of invisible injustice. Most had never filed formal complaints. They hadn't believed it would matter until now. One letter read, "I was a black nurse flying home from treating COVID patients. They asked me to move for a businessman. I never told anyone, but now I see that silence feeds the system. Thank you." Samantha read every word. She had them printed and bound, Volume 1 of what she titled Truth at Altitude. Meanwhile, corporate sponsors began pulling away from Richard Blackstone. The viral footage of him pointing at Samantha, followed by the reveal of her identity, had become one of the most shared moments of the year. His investment firm, Blackstone and Associates, bled clients daily. By Friday, 5 major contracts had terminated their portfolios, citing ethical misalignment. His name trended for all the wrong reasons. Blackstone fall, recline privilege, she owns the air. The dramatic high point came when Blackstone made a public statement. He stood at a podium in front of a drab beige wall, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. "I regret what happened on Flight 447. It was never my intent to offend or demean. I did not know Ms. Williams's identity at the time." The crowd of reporters was unimpressed. One shouted, "Would your actions have been different if she were white?" Another, "So discrimination is only regrettable if the victim is powerful." His hands trembled. I'm sorry," he muttered. No one applauded. Because it wasn't accountability. It was damage control. Back at Pinnacle HQ, Samantha watched the clip in silence. Monica entered with a tablet in hand. Legal has received 5 separate complaints about Patricia Wells dating back 3 years. She said, all buried. 2 involved women of color. 1 resulted in a settlement. Samantha nodded slowly. Terminate her retroactively. File her with HR's industry blacklist. No one else should carry her baggage. Monica tapped her screen. Done. Then, with a pause, she asked, "What about Jessica?" Samantha looked thoughtful. She bent, but didn't break. Schedule a meeting. Meanwhile, Jessica Chen sat in her apartment, eyes red from sleepless nights. She'd read every article, watched every clip, read every comment dragging her complicity. She didn't defend herself because they weren't wrong. She had hesitated, paused, checked a ticket she shouldn't have questioned, but then came the email. Subject opportunity to rise? From CEO, Meridian Industries. Com. Inside was a single line. "I believe in second flights," Jessica cried. Then replied, "Thank you. I won't waste it." The next day, Samantha met Jessica in person. They didn't meet in a boardroom. They met in the break room intentionally. "I needed to see how you walk into a room without power," Samantha said. Jessica stood tall, shamefully, but ready. Samantha extended her hand. "You're being promoted. head of passenger experience, and I'm pairing you with a mentor who'll teach you how to see what others try not to." Jessica blinked. "Why me?" "Because you flinched," Samantha replied, then reflected. "And now you'll help redesign what respect looks like. By Monday morning, Operation Equiflight officially launched. Every staff member received new onboarding manuals. Every flight crew attended intensive training. And every gate now bore a plaque that read, 'Dignity takes off here.'" The public response was overwhelming. 1 week after Samantha's takeover, bookings surged by 270%. Online reviews spiked with gratitude. Passengers shared their stories using the hashtag #IWasSeen. One woman tweeted, "For the first time in 15 years of flying while Black, no one side-eyed me in first class. Thank you, Samantha." A Latino father posted, "My son was treated like a VIP today because you changed the script." But the most unexpected call came from Washington. A senior official from the Department of Transportation. They invited Samantha to join a task force on federal passenger equality standards. And then came an even bigger call. "Hello, Ms. Williams," said a familiar voice. "This is Senator Warren. We need your voice in Congress." Samantha hung up, turned to Monica. "Get our legal team. We're going to D.C." Monica raised a brow. "You planning to run for office?" Samantha smiled. "No, I'm planning to run the system that decides who gets a seat." Washington, D.C., was buzzing, not with scandal, not with hearings, but with something far rarer, hope. Samantha Williams stepped into the Capitol wearing a sleek black pantsuit, a lapel pin shaped like a wing, and the quiet confidence of someone who had already changed one system and wasn't done. Senator Elizabeth Warren greeted her on the steps. "I've read the reports," she said. "The data's undeniable. Complaints dropped 90% in 1 week under your policies. That's unheard of." Samantha nodded. "Dignity scales when you institutionalize it." They smiled, because today, they weren't here to talk about one airline. They were here to rewrite the rules for all of them. Inside the chamber, Samantha testified before the Senate Committee on Transportation and Commerce. C-SPAN cameras rolled. News outlets streamed it live. People watched from phones, break rooms, airport lounges. They weren't watching a CEO. They were watching a blueprint. "My name is Samantha Williams," she began. "I'm the founder of Meridian Industries and the new owner of Pinnacle Airlines. I'm also a Black woman who was removed from her seat on her own flight because one man felt uncomfortable." Silence. Then she dropped the numbers. 64% of racial discrimination complaints in air travel go uninvestigated. 73% of Black passengers report being questioned more frequently than white counterparts. Less than 4% of airline executives are people of color. She paused. Then said, "The sky may be open, but the cabin isn't equal. Yet." The dramatic high point came when Senator Warren asked, "What would you do, Ms. Williams, if you could design federal aviation policy from scratch?" Samantha stood. "I'd write a Passenger Dignity Act." She clicked a remote. A digital display lit up behind her. The Passenger Dignity Act. Mandatory anti-bias training for all airline staff. Federal oversight of discrimination complaints. Transparency in customer complaint data. Federal-level no-tolerance policies for race-based removal. whistleblower protection for employees who report discrimination. The room buzzed. Even opposition senators leaned forward. Senator Warren whispered, "We'll co-sponsor." Back at Pinnacle HQ, Monica monitored the hearing live with a team of execs. Jessica Chen sat beside her, taking notes her first week as head of passenger experience. "We're not just fixing a company," she said aloud. "We're creating a national model." Monica nodded. She's turning humiliation into legislation. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Angela sat in her living room, eyes locked on the screen, tears glistening beside her. Marcus, now inspired beyond imagination, whispered, "She's building something big." "Mama," Angela smiled. "She's building a runway for all of us." The impact was instant. Airlines across the country preemptively adopted pieces of Samantha's proposal. Jet North announced a new diversity chief. Sky Atlantic launched empathy training modules. Even rival carrier Apex Air began advertising Respect Class, a thinly veiled attempt to catch up. But no one matched Pinnacle's integrity, because at Pinnacle, change wasn't cosmetic. It was coded into the flight manifest. Samantha returned to Chicago and met with her executive team. The question on the table: where do we go from here? Her answer: we become the world's most human airline. She outlined her next initiative, Skybound Futures, a program to recruit, train, and elevate young talent from underserved communities into aviation careers, from pilots to engineers to corporate execs. "Because it's not just about who's on the plane," she said. "It's about who gets to fly it." Meanwhile, Richard Blackstone's story unraveled further. New footage emerged him at a country club making racially charged jokes. Clients vanished. His firm's value plummeted, and then, the final blow, his board ousted him. His company rebranded. Blackstone and Associates became Equity Wealth Group without him. No press conference, no goodbye, just a man erased by his own prejudice. Patricia Wells. Still unemployed, still unrepentant. She'd tried to sue for wrongful termination, but Pinnacle's lawyers, equipped with passenger testimonies, video, and past complaints, had her case dismissed within days. Wells's story became cautionary reading in HR textbooks. The price of protecting privilege. And what of the boy who asked if Samantha owned the plane? Young Marcus got a letter in the mail. Inside was a signed photo of Samantha in front of a Pinnacle jet, below her signature. To Marcus, never forget, your seat in this world is earned with courage, and no one gets to take it from you. Samantha. He framed it above his bed. And every night, he whispered, I own the sky too. 3 months after Flight 447, Samantha Williams stood on the tarmac at O'Hare, surrounded by cameras not for scandal, but for celebration. Behind her gleamed a freshly painted Pinnacle Airlines Boeing 787. But this aircraft had no ordinary livery. Across its fuselage, in bold silver letters, it read, The Samantha Williams Initiative Dignity in Every Cabin. This wasn't branding. It was a declaration. She didn't speak at first. She let the sight sink in. Around her stood pilots, flight attendants, engineers, interns, every department represented. A cross-section of the new Pinnacle Airlines. Diverse, engaged, empowered, and waiting for their leader's voice. When I was 11, Samantha began. My mother took me to the airport to watch planes. We couldn't afford tickets. We just watched. She told me, one day, you'll be on those flights, and one day, you'll run them. She paused. I thought she was dreaming too big, but here we are. Inside the aircraft, Seat 2A had been retired. It now bore a plaque that read, "Reserved for every passenger who's been told they don't belong." Meanwhile, in New York, Samantha's autobiography hit shelves. From Seat 23F to CEO debuted at 1 on the nonfiction bestseller list. It wasn't just a memoir. It was a roadmap. Her media tour ignited a movement. Passengers began sharing stories online with the tag "My Flight, My Voice" stories of silent prejudice, seat swaps driven by bias, and staff members who had looked the other way. But now, they were being heard and believed. The dramatic high point came at the International Aviation Leadership Summit in Geneva. Samantha was the keynote speaker, the first Black woman ever given that honor. CEOs from 70 airlines, ministers of transport, world leaders. She stepped onto the stage with a single carry-on in her hand, placed it on the podium, opened it. Inside a battered economy seatbelt, "This," she said, holding it up, "is from Seat 23F, the seat I was forced into before I was announced as your peer." The room went still. This is the weight we ask passengers to bear, not for safety, but for survival. She dropped the belt onto the podium. No more. She unveiled her next initiative, the Sky Bridge Accord, a global pact for transportation equality. Over 30 carriers signed it on the spot. Commitments included standardized global anti-bias training, international complaint-sharing networks, protections for passengers across borders, languages, and classes. A Swiss aviation minister wept. A South African airline pledged free flights for underrepresented aviation students. It wasn't just change. It was momentum. Back at Pinnacle, Jessica Chen thrived. Under Samantha's mentorship, she led the Dignity Desk, a 24/7 passenger support line staffed with real humans, not bots. Complaints dropped 88%. Praise increased 300%. Staff morale soared. Jessica spoke at universities and wrote op-eds on second chances. She often ended her talks with, "Samantha Williams could have ended my career. Instead, she taught me what service really means." And then came the ripple effects. Delta, United. Even foreign giants like Lufthansa and Emirates began adopting Samantha's principles. Her Passenger Dignity Act gained bipartisan traction in Congress, an unprecedented feat in an age of division. CNN called it the first law of the skies born from ground-level injustice. But Samantha's greatest legacy wasn't legal. It was personal. Young Marcus was now 10. He received a full scholarship from the Diana Williams Foundation, the nonprofit Samantha named after her mother. He'd already written an essay called "How I Learned to Walk Like a CEO at 35,000 Feet." It won first prize in a national student leadership competition. Angela, his mother, often spoke at community centers. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She didn't break. She took humiliation and turned it into hardware wiring a better future for all of us. But Samantha's journey wasn't done, because the skies were vast. And every plane carried a potential injustice waiting to be caught or corrected. She knew the job wasn't to be worshipped. It was to work, to build the cockpit before others ever knew they'd need it. To leave a flight plan behind for those still stuck at the gate, because this wasn't just about a seat. It was about who gets to decide who sits where, and as long as she was in the air, everyone had a place. 6 months into her ownership of Pinnacle Airlines, Samantha Williams called for a full internal summit. No marketing fluff, no executive posturing, just truth. The title of the event, Turbulence: What We Missed, What We're Fixing. All 150 top-level executives were flown into Chicago, and none of them were given talking points. Because this wasn't a PR meeting, it was a reckoning. Inside the glass-paneled auditorium, Samantha took the stage. Behind her, a single slide displayed a date. June 8th, the day the cabin turned. Below it, a grainy freeze frame from Flight 447. Samantha, standing calmly in economy seat 23F. Marcus, looking back over his shoulder. Patricia Wells, pointing. Jessica Chen, eyes down. Every executive stared at it. Uncomfortable, exposed, and absolutely unable to look away. Most of you know the story, Samantha began. Some of you tried to bury it. Some of you made excuses. Some of you just stayed quiet. She let the silence stretch. This summit isn't about blame. It's about behavior. Then she clicked to the next slide. Employee Complaint Heat Map, 2022 to 2024. Red dots spread like a rash across the map. Every dot is a passenger who was made to feel smaller, less human, less worthy of the sky. The dramatic high point came next. She held up a thick stack of printed pages. These, she said, are the 120 employees who received the highest number of discriminatory complaints and were never disciplined. Murmurs. She dropped the stack onto a table. Loud. Final. I'm giving every executive in this room 30 days to address their departments. Either you root this out, or I replace you with someone who will. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because when someone owns the air you breathe, volume becomes optional. But this wasn't a threat. It was a turning point. Because Samantha didn't just hold people accountable, she gave them tools. She announced the launch of Project Altitude, an internal equity scorecard applied to every employee and department. Performance metrics now included. Bias response time, inclusion feedback from passengers and crew. Representation across hiring, promotion, and leadership levels. Raises would be tied to these scores. Promotions, too. For the first time, inclusion had teeth. Jessica Chen, now 6 months into her redemption arc, took the stage next. Her title VP of Passenger Dignity. Her speech brief, raw, and unforgettable. I was trained to follow procedure, but no one trained me to follow my gut. I made a mistake, and I'm standing here because someone believed my remorse mattered more than my mistake. And now I make sure no staff member ever has to choose between doing their job and doing what's right. The executives clapped harder than expected because they weren't applauding her confession. They were applauding the rarest thing in corporate life, change they could feel. After the summit, Samantha sat in her office with Monica and David Chen, her legal counsel. Some execs are going to resist this, David warned. Samantha nodded. Then they'll get reacquainted with unemployment. He smiled. Just wanted to confirm, Monica added. Also, 4 other airlines want to license Project Altitude. One's offering $20 million. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Tell them it's not for sale. Pause. But I'll train their teams for free if they commit to publishing their equity audits annually. Meanwhile, a ripple effect spread through the aviation industry. Delta created a Passenger Fairness Council. American Airlines launched Operation Cabin Care, but no one matched Pinnacle's commitment. Because at Pinnacle, the change wasn't policy, it was personal. Patricia Wells, still unemployed, wrote a scathing op-ed titled, "Corporate Wokeness Has Gone Too Far." It ran in a fringe blog. No one paid attention. Because the world had moved on, and Samantha hadn't just rewritten the rules, she'd reset the compass. Young Marcus, now back in school, gave a class presentation titled, "How a Seat Can Change the Sky." His teacher wept. His classmates applauded. He ended it with a photo of Samantha shaking his hand, and 7 bold words. "This is what dignity looks like flying," Angela, watching from the classroom doorway, whispered to herself. He'll never forget that flight, and neither would the world. By the 9th month of her ownership, Samantha Williams didn't just run an airline, she ran a movement. Pinnacle Airlines wasn't just profitable, it was principled. But Samantha knew long-term change wasn't about press conferences or policy memos. It was about people, so she launched something that would outlast her tenure and maybe even her name. She called it Ascend. A leadership pipeline to recruit, mentor, and promote underrepresented talent in aviation from ground crew to executive ranks. No quotas. Just opportunity. Realigned. One Thursday morning, inside a training center on the outskirts of Atlanta, the first class of Ascend cadets assembled. 18 faces. Black, brown, Asian, indigenous, white, female, male, non-binary, veteran, first gen, former foster child. All of them had one thing in common. They'd been told at some point, this industry isn't for you. Samantha stepped into the room without fanfare, just a tablet in hand and her usual calm authority. I want to start with a question, she said. Raise your hand if someone in your life told you flying was for other people. 17 hands went up. 1 remained. A boy named Dante. No one told me that, he said, but I believed it anyway. Samantha smiled. Then, let's rewire that belief. Over the next 12 weeks, the cadets learned aviation operations, ethics, leadership, and history, including the uncomfortable parts, the Tuskegee Airmen. Gender exclusion in early flight crews, profiling in post-9/11 policies. The hidden stories of black pilots and ground workers buried in corporate records. Samantha didn't sanitize history. She weaponized truth as curriculum. The dramatic high point came during Week 8. Cadets took a mandatory in-flight simulation, real pressure, real crew, real stakes. Halfway through, the simulator malfunctioned. The captain, a seasoned instructor, announced a personnel shortage and asked a volunteer to step in as acting co-pilot. Silence. Tension. Then Dante, the same cadet who'd admitted to self-doubt on day 1, stood up. "I'll do it," he said. He walked calmly to the front. strapped in, took the controls, guided the aircraft through a simulated emergency landing, heart racing, hands steady. When the scenario ended, the lights came up. Applause thundered through the training cabin. Samantha stood in the back, silent, smiling. He didn't need her validation. He'd already earned his altitude. That evening, Dante found an envelope in his locker. Inside was a handwritten note. The sky was never closed to you. They just painted the doors white. Fly it like you own it. As the Ascend program gained attention, aviation giants came calling. Boeing, Airbus, Delta, they wanted in. But Samantha refused partnerships unless they agreed to 3 things: publish annual DEI progress reports, offer fully funded internships to Ascend graduates, place at least one Ascend alum in a senior management seat within 18 months. Some balked. Most agreed. Because you couldn't say no to the woman who turned a seat downgrade into a billion-dollar turnaround, Monica pulled Samantha aside one afternoon. "You've built an empire," she said. "What's next?" Samantha looked out the glass wall of her office as a jet roared past the window. Then answered, "Now I build the runway for others." Meanwhile, Marcus, now 11, was writing a speech for his school's leadership showcase. He refused help. "I want it to sound like me," he told his mom. Angela read the final draft late at night. It ended with, "I used to think first class was for people who looked rich. Now I know it's for people who rise, no matter how they start. I want to build things that make others feel like they belong, just like she did for me." She cried the whole time. Across the country, passengers who once feared profiling felt safer. Flight attendants shared how Ascend-aligned training helped them de-escalate rather than profile, and crew members of color, long silenced, felt seen. But it wasn't all applause. A smear piece in a right-wing blog labeled Samantha a corporate radical. She read the headline, then smiled. Because if dignity, equity, and accountability made her radical, then the skies needed a revolution. And she was flying lead. Would you like me to continue with part 13, 850 words? Banja noi yes. ChatGPT Jan noi perfect. Here's part 13. A seat for every name 850 words includes one dramatic high point. By the 1-year mark, Samantha Williams had become a name etched into aviation history. But she hadn't forgotten her mother's words. Turn your pain into power and then use that power to pull someone else up. So when the Pinnacle Board suggested naming a new fleet of aircraft after cities, Samantha had a different idea. "Name them after people who were told they didn't belong in the sky," she said. They called the initiative the Legacy Fleet. Every plane would be named for someone known or unknown whose identity had once been used against them in travel, not to erase the pain, but to honor their persistence. The first 3 aircraft were unveiled on a sunlit day in Phoenix. Plane 1. The Claudette Colvin, honoring the teenage civil rights icon who refused to give up her seat before Rosa Parks did. Plane 2. The Abdul Rahman, named after a Muslim pilot denied a commercial job post 9/11 due to his name. Plane 3. The Tanaka sisters, Japanese-American flight attendants wrongfully interned during Depu Searcho. Each tail bore not a corporate logo, but a quote. Claudette's read, "They tried to remove me. I held my place." But the dramatic high point of the day came with the surprise unveiling of Plane 4. As the tarp dropped, the crowd gasped. Painted across its silver fuselage, the Diana Williams mother of Samantha. Cleaner, server, builder of dreams. Samantha stood back, tearful but composed. She turned to Marcus, who stood beside her. My mother taught me to walk tall, and now, even the sky remembers her. Back inside the hangar, journalists flooded her with questions. But one little girl, maybe 9, quietly approached. She wore a tiny blazer and clutched a notepad. Ms. Williams, she asked, can I ask you a question for my school paper? Samantha knelt to her level. Absolutely. What do you say to people who think the world's already fair? Samantha didn't hesitate. I say take a look at who's always being asked to prove they belong. She handed the girl her press badge. Use this to go wherever they tell you you can't. Later that night, Samantha hosted a private dinner for Ascend alumni, pilots, and ground crew. She stood at the head of the room with a champagne flute not for herself, but for them. This isn't my celebration, she said. This is yours for surviving a system that wasn't designed for you, and then helping redesign it anyway. A young transgender mechanic raised a glass. To seat 23F, they said. To seat 23F, the room echoed. Meanwhile, news outlets couldn't keep up with the ripple effects. Southwest Airlines pledged $10 million to minority aviation scholarships. Spirit Air implemented Samantha's equity scorecard company-wide. The FAA requested a licensing deal for Pinnacle's training program across regional carriers, and the Passenger Dignity Act, once seen as symbolic, was now federal law. Samantha declined all interviews for 1 week. She needed time. Not for rest, but for research. Because the next frontier wasn't in the skies, it was in the airports. Monica found her in her office at 114A, reviewing blueprints. What are you doing? She asked. Redesigning security checkpoints, Samantha replied. Because respect starts at the gate, not the seat. She pointed to a diagram. Quiet lanes for neurodivergent travelers, prayer rooms, multi-language signage, real-time discrimination reporting via app. Monica blinked. You're rebuilding the entire experience. Samantha smiled. Of course. You thought we'd stop at 30,000 feet. Marcus, now 12, gave a TEDx youth talk titled How a Woman in Row 23 Saved My Future. He walked on stage, unshaken. He said, the sky isn't the limit. It's just the next classroom. The crowd stood before he finished, but back in Chicago, Patricia Wells watched from her apartment couch, jobless, bitter, forgotten by the very system she once upheld. She reached for the remote to change the channel, then paused. Because despite her resentment, she couldn't look away, because even she knew. This is what justice looks like when it boards early and flies first. Samantha Williams stood inside Gate A23 of Detroit Metropolitan Airport, the very terminal she once boarded anonymously, her dignity quietly trampled. But today, it was different. Today, she was here not to board, but to dedicate. The sign above the gate had been replaced. It now read, The Diana Williams Welcome Lounge. In honor of every mother who gave more than she had so her child could fly. Beside it, a plaque etched in bronze read, She worked 3 jobs. She cleaned offices. She stocked shelves. She whispered, "Your mind is your ticket." This terminal exists because of her. Passengers wept. Employees applauded. Samantha didn't speak. She just touched the plaque, then whispered, "Thank you, Mom." The lounge was unlike any other in the airport. No first-class exclusivity. No private access fees. It was open to educators, single parents traveling with children, veterans, essential workers, anyone carrying a child or a story heavier than their bags. It had quiet pods, storybook nooks, fresh coffee brewed hourly, and a wall of digital portraits called Unsung Travelers. Real passengers who'd flown invisible until now. The dramatic high point came when Angela and Marcus arrived to cut the ribbon. Samantha insisted they do it, not her. "This lounge exists because a mother raised a son to see justice," she said. "And because that son reminded me who I was when the world tried to strip it away." As Marcus raised the scissors, reporters leaned in. "Any advice for kids who feel like they don't belong in first class?" one shouted. Marcus grinned. "Build your own airline." The crowd erupted. Samantha beamed. Afterward, Angela hugged her tightly. "You don't know what this means for families like mine," she said. Samantha replied, "It means we fly forward and we don't leave anyone behind." Back at Pinnacle HQ, the board of directors gathered for an emergency vote. Not a scandal, not a lawsuit. A proposal unprecedented in aviation history. Monica outlined it. Effective next quarter, Pinnacle Airlines will reinvest 5% of net profits annually into the Diana Williams Foundation. Board members blinked. "That's over $200 million annually," one murmured. Samantha looked each of them in the eyes. Diana Williams gave everything without ever stepping on a plane. "We're going to make sure no child is grounded because of money, location, or surname." The board voted, unanimous approval. The fund would support full-ride scholarships for students in aviation and engineering, grants for female and minority-led startups in transportation, financial assistance for passengers who experience discrimination in travel. CNN's headline the next day, "Williams Grounds Greed Elevates Generations." Meanwhile, Patricia Wells, disgraced, unemployed, and out of the industry, applied to speak on a podcast titled Redemption in the Workplace. The host rejected her. Not out of vengeance, but because her application said, "I didn't know what I did was wrong." That, Samantha believed, was the exact reason redemption wasn't possible for some. Jessica Chen, however, flourished. She now led a 300-person department focused solely on equity training and bias intervention. Her newest initiative. Listen Before You Land, a program that gave passengers the right to immediate review if flagged or questioned based on appearance, name, or accent. It changed international flight protocols across 14 airlines. Jessica addressed the United Nations Transport Summit. She said, "Passengers aren't threats to be managed. They're stories to be understood." In a quiet Chicago suburb, Marcus prepared for a school interview. The final question: "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He wrote, "A CEO, like Samantha Williams, but I want to build trains, because she already fixed the sky." The foundation's reach exploded. 1 year in, it had funded 87 college scholarships, 112 small business grants, 41 bias training contracts, 9 new airport dignity lounges across the country, and it was just getting started. But Samantha kept her mission grounded. She didn't care about legacy for its own sake. She cared that no child would have to choose between belonging and breathing. She told Monica every terminal is a threshold, every seat a statement. And the world will know what we stand for before the wheels even leave the ground. 12 months and 7 days after she was removed from seat 2A, Samantha Williams returned to that exact same aircraft. Same plane, same route. Same time, but everything else different. This time, the welcome was personal. Flight attendants lined the boarding door, not with scripted smiles, but reverent warmth. Passengers in both economy and first class whispered, nudged, and pointed. Is that her? That's Samantha Williams. She owns this airline. Right. She owns more than that. Someone said. She owns the truth. She wore the same Navy suit, carried the same Italian briefcase, wore the same watch her mother gave her. But when she stepped into first class, the energy shifted. Seat 2A had been preserved intentionally unoccupied. A velvet rope blocked it off. In its place, a display case held her original torn boarding pass, a photo of her in seat 23F. A miniature version of the passenger bill of respect. A placard read, "The seat that changed everything, donated by Samantha Williams, preserved by every voice that refused to stay quiet. Instead, she sat in 2B. Next to an elderly black woman with silver locks and a quiet strength in her eyes, the woman reached into her purse and pulled out a small, folded photo. It showed a young Diana Williams mopping an office floor, looking up with pride at a school portrait of Samantha pinned to a bulletin board. "She was proud of you before the world knew your name," the woman said. Samantha nodded. She still is. 30 minutes into the flight, a voice came over the intercom, but it wasn't the captain. It was Samantha. She had requested to address the cabin not for attention, but for impact. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Samantha Williams, CEO of Pinnacle Airlines," she began, her voice soft but commanding. "I want to thank you for flying with us today. 1 year ago, I sat in economy seat 23F after being told I didn't belong here, and now I sit not above but among you." She paused. "I don't believe in power for punishment. I believe in power for purpose. And my purpose is to make sure you never have to earn your dignity at altitude." The dramatic high point came when she made a public vow. A binding commitment, a call that would shake the industry again. Starting next quarter, Pinnacle Airlines will adopt a revolutionary new policy. Bias at 30,000, transparency protocol. Every complaint of discrimination from seat assignments to tone policing will be reviewed by a third-party equity council. Each case will be published anonymously in our quarterly transparency report. And every employee found complicit will receive mandatory coaching or face removal. Because in our cabins, silence will no longer fly. The cabin burst into applause. A white businessman across the aisle nodded slowly. A teenage girl in row 4 wiped away tears. Angela, watching the live announcement via Pinnacle's app, held Marcus close. "She's building something no one can take away," she whispered. Marcus replied, "She's building us." Back at headquarters, Monica fielded dozens of calls from press, regulators, and partner airlines. One email subject line read, "Pinnacle just changed the rules again." David Chen called her, "FAA's legal team wants to model federal transparency standards off what Samantha just announced." Monica laughed. Of course they do. That evening, Samantha arrived at a gala hosted by the National Civil Rights Aviation Coalition. She wasn't there to receive an award. She was there to present one. She stepped on stage and called up a trembling 20-year-old intern named Xavier. He had flagged a racially motivated seat downgrade last month and escalated it all the way to Samantha's desk, bypassing layers of cowardice. She handed him a trophy, because justice isn't top-down, it's person-to-person. Then she paused, and for the first time in her public career, she allowed herself to cry. Not from pain, but from relief. Because she no longer had to be the only one holding the flashlight in the dark. Others now carried it forward. Autumn descended on Chicago with the precision of a well-timed descent, brisk air, golden trees, and the hum of transformation in every corridor of Pinnacle Airlines headquarters. Inside her office on the 23rd floor, Samantha Williams stood barefoot. Not out of comfort, out of ritual. Every Friday, she removed her shoes and stood on the cold tile, facing east toward Detroit, toward her mother's old job sites, toward where it all began. She whispered, "We're still climbing, Mama." Then she picked up her phone and made a call that would start her boldest initiative yet. She rang the FAA's Director of Regulatory Programs, not to lobby, to partner. Her proposal: a joint task force between Pinnacle Airlines and federal aviation regulators called Cabin Equal. Its mission: to define, regulate, and enforce equitable treatment as a safety protocol, not just a moral issue. At first, the FAA balked. "Bias isn't in our domain," one official protested. Samantha replied, "Bias is turbulence. Passengers feel long before takeoff. If your job is to stabilize the skies, you can't ignore what shakes people before they even buckle their belts." Silence. Then, "We're listening." Cabin Equal launched with 3 arms. Incident recording reform. Flight staff now required to log why a passenger is moved, not just that they were moved. Bias audit flags. Recurrent complaints by passengers of color or visible minorities would trigger automatic internal review. Passenger dignity counselors. On-call personnel trained in de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and traveler trauma available at all major hubs. The dramatic high point came during the first Cabin Equal Review Board session. A case file landed on the table. A Muslim woman had been asked to move from an exit row after a passenger voiced comfort concerns. The reviewing supervisor claimed, "It was just a precaution." Samantha opened the meeting with a printed transcript of the exchange. She read it aloud, then calmly slid forward a resignation form. "We're not in the business of codifying cowardice." The supervisor signed without protest, because the culture had changed. The air was different now. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Xavier, the intern she'd awarded weeks earlier, began mentoring high school students through Pinnacle's ground-up program. He taught them about flight mechanics, cabin pressurization, and policy. But most importantly, "You don't just change the plane," he told them. "You change the hands that build it." In Detroit, Angela received a call she never expected. She had been selected as one of 5 parent representatives on Pinnacle's Passenger Equity Board. Her first act. She suggested a new in-flight announcement. We'd like to remind all passengers that dignity flies with every seat class. If you see something that challenges this value, report it. We listen. We change. The board approved it unanimously, and Marcus. He sat at his desk with colored pencils and drew an airplane, but this one had kids at the controls. Brown kids, white kids, hijabi girls, kids in wheelchairs. He titled it, All Clear for Takeoff. Samantha framed the drawing and placed it beside her mother's photograph. Media coverage swelled. News anchors labeled her the quiet storm of the skies. The CEO who redefined altitude, America's most impactful airline owner. She ignored the noise. Instead, she focused on expanding cabin equal into a global standard. Japan Airlines signed on. Air France initiated pilot tests. Kenya Airways requested cultural adaptation materials. Meanwhile, the Passenger Dignity Act passed unanimously in a second UN vote this time, with over 100 countries supporting it. A new aviation code section would now appear in international law. A traveler's humanity is not a negotiable asset. Back at Pinnacle HQ, Jessica Chen stood on a stage of her own. She was introducing the company's first Employee Equity Index report, a full, transparent breakdown of promotion statistics, wage equity, and diversity by department. What once would have caused chaos now created pride. Staff leaned in. They saw themselves on the charts represented, heard, and respected. Jessica ended with, "We are the flight crew of a fairer world." Later that night, Samantha received an anonymous letter at home. It read, "I was on that plane. I said nothing, but I saw everything, and I've carried it for a year. I'm sorry for my silence. I'm raising my daughters to do better." No signature, no return address. Just a single enclosed item, a crumpled napkin from Flight 447. Samantha placed it in a clear case. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Even those who stayed silent can choose a new altitude. The following spring, the FAA released its first-ever equity compliance report, and one name dominated the executive summary, Pinnacle Airlines. The report cited highest passenger equity scores in North America, fastest resolution time for bias complaints, most diverse leadership team across all U.S. carriers. But Samantha Williams didn't celebrate with headlines. She celebrated with action. She boarded Flight 211 from Chicago to Seattle not as CEO, not as a keynote speaker, but as a passenger in coach, deliberately. Seat 14C, middle. The woman beside her glanced up. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're her." Samantha nodded. "Today, I'm just Sam, traveling like everyone else. But even as Sam, eyes followed her, curious, respectful, reverent. Not out of fame, out of gratitude. Because passengers knew she changed the aisle. An hour into the flight, a small incident unfolded in row 17. A white man refused to sit next to a black teenager, citing personal discomfort. The flight attendant hesitated. Passengers watched. Tension crackled. Then seat 14C stood up. Samantha quietly walked to the row. She didn't speak to the man. She turned to the teen. "I'd be honored to sit beside you. If that's okay. The teen nodded, stunned. Samantha swapped seats, sat down, and pulled out a book. The Souls of Black Folk. The cabin exhaled. The man in question, he shrank into himself, ashamed, unseen. And in that moment, a new kind of flight power emerged. The dramatic high point came when a young crew member approached after landing. She whispered, "Ms. Williams." That moment, that seat switch, that taught more than 10 HR modules ever could. Samantha replied, "Policy works, but example leads." The crew member wiped a tear. "I joined this airline because of what you did, but today you showed me why I stayed." When she exited the plane, applause rippled through the terminal. Not planned, not orchestrated. Passengers simply stood and clapped. A man shouted, "Seat 14C is going in the history books." She smiled, bowed her head, and walked through the crowd like she was walking through legacy. That weekend, Pinnacle Airlines launched Project Compass, a new customer experience overhaul based on 4 principles. Human first. Staff trained to see every passenger as a story before a seat number. Bias interrupt. Empower any employee to stop a discriminatory action in real time with full HR and legal support. Restorative response. Discriminated passengers offered resolution, not silence, including face-to-face accountability if requested. Dignity data. Quarterly scorecards posted publicly, no spin, no shielding. The Pilot Airport, Chicago O'Hare. Samantha walked through its newly redesigned gates, noting every detail. Wider lanes for wheelchair access. Multilingual signage. Sensory-friendly check-in counters. Dignity ambassadors stationed every 30 yards. Angela and Marcus visited the next day. "Feels different," Angela whispered. Marcus said, "Feels fair." Samantha beamed. Meanwhile, Xavier, now a full-time equity manager, pitched a bold idea during a town hall. What if we reclassify staff hierarchy, not by uniform, but by empathy rating, laughter? Then silence, then slow nods. Samantha said, "Draft the framework. Let's fly with it." In Detroit, a former security officer named Marcus Johnson sat in an HR training module at a new job, one funded by Pinnacle's Justice Fellowship program. He watched a simulation of a racial bias incident on a plane. It mirrored what he'd once been a part of. And as the video ended, the instructor asked, "What should the security officer have done differently?" Marcus raised his hand. He should have stood between dignity and pressure. That's the job. Applause filled the room, because the man who once escorted Samantha off Flight 447, he was now teaching courage, 1 year and 3 months into her ownership. Samantha launched a final initiative. The Dignity Legacy Lab, a policy incubator to solve travel inequity across all transportation sectors, not just air, but rail, bus, maritime. Her goal: no passenger should have to shrink to fit inside a system that was never designed for them. That same week, a girl named Lila boarded her first flight at LAX. 10 years old, afro puffs, clutching a book bag. She spotted a framed photo in the terminal of a woman standing in row 23F. "Mommy," she said, "isn't that the lady from my school poster?" Her mom smiled. "She's the reason your school got that new computer lab." Lila touched the frame. and whispered, "Thank you for making space for girls like me." 15 months after the infamous flight, Samantha Williams stood in front of the U.S. Senate Committee on Transportation, not to defend, to define. Behind her, a screen displayed 6 words: "Dignity is a safety standard." She wasn't there as CEO. She was there as witness, architect, and survivor. A senator cleared his throat. "Ms. Williams, in your opinion, what's the biggest threat facing the aviation industry today?" She looked straight ahead. "Complicity," she said. "Not turbulence, not staffing shortages, not fuel prices. Complicity with injustice." They grilled her about lawsuits, about profitability, about whether focusing on discrimination compromised efficiency. Samantha didn't flinch. "I've increased revenue by 37%, while decreasing complaints by 92%. So, if dignity is inefficient, perhaps we've been measuring efficiency wrong." The room went still. Then came the dramatic high point. Senator Hayes, a longtime airline industry ally, leaned forward. "What if other airlines say what happened to you was isolated and overreaction?" Samantha smiled gently. "Then I invite them to review their own silence." She pulled out a sealed black binder. The label read, "Unreported incidents. Passenger letters never answered." She slid it across the table. 300 pages. Stories like mine. Worse than mine. All ignored. Until now. She didn't have to raise her voice, because when the truth lands, it lands heavy. The gallery behind her stood and clapped. Angela was there. So was Marcus. So was Jessica Chen, now leading industry trainings across 4 continents. And in the front row sat Claudette Colvin herself, flown in by Samantha, their eyes locked. The old pioneer, the new captain, a silent salute passed between them. That night, Samantha walked the tarmac at Chicago O'Hare alone. A jet taxied in front of her. A child pressed her face to the window, wide-eyed. Samantha waved. The child waved back, not because she knew who Samantha was, but because something about that face calm, proud, powerful, made her feel safe. Monica joined her on the tarmac, holding a tablet. "Breaking news," she said. President just endorsed the International Dignity Travel Accord, based entirely on your cabin equal model. Samantha nodded and said only, "Tell them we're ready to help." At Pinnacle HQ, the walls were lined with portraits, not of founders, not of donors, of passengers who had been profiled, mistreated, dismissed, and who had written letters now displayed as permanent exhibits. Each frame included a quote. One read, "You're too loud." Underneath it, "Volume increases at altitude." Jessica's department released a new tool that week. Altitude Index, a real-time equity tracker embedded in flight apps. Passengers could now report unfair treatment and see how airlines responded publicly. Transparency wasn't optional anymore. It was embedded into the boarding pass. Marcus presented at his school's equity fair. His project. A diorama of an airplane. On one side, passengers being ignored, profiled, dismissed. On the other, passengers being welcomed, respected, protected. He titled it, "Two Cabins, One Choice." He ended his speech with, What if Samantha never got her seat back? What if she stayed quiet? Would my story have changed? The auditorium stood. His teacher wiped away tears. Angela whispered, "Your story changed the world." In cities across the country, new Diana lounges opened at regional airports, quiet sanctuaries of dignity. Each one contained a wall labeled, "The seat I deserved." Passengers could write down moments they were overlooked and have those stories recorded in a national archive. Meanwhile, Patricia Wells sat in her apartment in Milwaukee, watching a special report about Pinnacle's transformation. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just aware of everything she had never questioned. She whispered, "I didn't lose my job. I lost my compass." Then she turned off the TV and opened a book, How to Listen When You're Wrong. Samantha visited her mother's old diner in Detroit. It had closed years ago, but the owner's daughter, now 40, let her in. The red booths, the flickering neon, the scent of memory. Samantha sat at the same counter where her mom used to pour coffee. She ordered nothing. Just sat, soaked in the past. Then pulled out a small notebook. Inside, she wrote a letter to herself. You sat in seat 2A for everyone who had ever been told they belonged in the back. You moved to seat 23F, but you never moved from your truth. This isn't revenge. It's reformation. She closed the book, left it under the counter, and walked out toward the airport, toward the next flight, toward the next repair. 2 years to the day after Samantha Williams was removed from seat 2A, Pinnacle Airlines announced an unprecedented event, Flight 447, Commemorative Journey, a ceremonial flight retracing the original route Detroit to Chicago. Same plane, same crew uniforms, but one important difference. Seat 2A would remain empty, not by mistake. By choice, reporters flooded the press box. Former passengers from the original flight were invited. Civil rights leaders, educators, young scholarship recipients, all present. But Samantha didn't sit with VIPs. She boarded last, wearing a simple navy blue sweater and black slacks. No cameras, no PR team, just her. Flight 447 took off under perfect skies. The pilot announced, "We are honored to carry not just passengers, but history." As the aircraft leveled, flight attendants served passengers handwritten letters instead of peanuts. Each read, "Seat 2A is empty today, not because no one wanted it, but because no one should have had to earn it through pain. We honor every person who's ever been asked to shrink. Not today. Not ever again." Mid-flight, a hush settled over the cabin. Jessica Chen stepped forward, now the airline's chief inclusion officer, and invited passengers to share memories. One by one, people stood. Angela talked about watching her son become fearless. Xavier recounted his first day as an intern, shaking with doubt, and the day Samantha shook his hand and said, "You belong here." A white flight attendant from the original flight stood, voice trembling. "I didn't speak up that day, but I've spent every day since learning how to." Then came the dramatic high point. A young girl, maybe 10, stood slowly from the back of the plane. Skin dark, braids neat, confidence unshaken. "My name is Lila," she said, "and I've never flown before today." I was scared, but I saw her get on board, and I wasn't scared anymore. She looked straight at Samantha. "Thank you for keeping the seat empty so we could fill it with stories." Tears broke like rainfall. not out of sadness, but recognition. When the plane landed, passengers didn't rush off. They stayed, stood, gathered around seat 2A. They took photos not of themselves, but of the space that once held injustice and now held memory. Then, without coordination, without words, they began placing tokens in the seat. A child's drawing, a pilot's wings, a passenger's broken earring from that day, a folded napkin with the words, "You changed my altitude." Outside, on the tarmac, a second ceremony began. Samantha stepped up to the podium, but this time, she held no notes. She looked to the horizon, then said, "Seat 2A was once a site of humiliation. Now, it is a symbol of repair. And repair means we remember who sat down, who stood up, and who stayed silent. But most of all, it means no one will ever again have to trade their dignity to take their seat." The ceremony ended with a final gesture. A bronze seat, an exact replica of 2A, was unveiled inside O'Hare Airport Terminal B. Inscribed, "For every passenger who was asked to move but moved a nation instead." As the sun dipped low, Samantha finally allowed herself a moment of solitude. She returned to the commemorative plane, now parked, empty, and sat not in 2A, but in 23F. She ran her fingers over the worn armrest, breathed deep, then whispered, "From here, we lifted everything." At that same moment, in airports around the world, small groups of employees held moments of silence at gates named for equity champions. In Nairobi, in Seoul, in São Paulo, in Atlanta, Samantha's blueprint had become global code. Back in Detroit, Marcus stood in front of his middle school classroom and presented his history project. A miniature cabin, half with no names, half with names etched in every seat. He called it, "Who Got to Sit?" He pointed to the middle. "This seat is mine," he said, "because someone made room before I got here." His teacher, a Latina educator named Ms. Rivera, clapped through tears. "You just earned yourself an A and something bigger than a grade." At Pinnacle HQ, Monica filed the last annual report of the quarter. Profits up, complaints down, retention historic. But most striking, a new metric on the report's cover. Number of lives dignified, 192. 38.4. Samantha read it, signed the final page, and wrote in the margin. Next year, double it. There was no ticker tape parade, no champagne toast, no roaring headlines. Just one woman, a framed drawing, and a terminal full of people who now walked with straighter backs. Samantha Williams stood at the Diana Williams International Terminal, renamed not just for a mother, but for a mission. Behind her, etched into the wall in 12 languages, were the words, "No seat is a gift. Dignity is not an upgrade. It is the boarding pass to being human." Samantha had never set out to change an industry. She only wanted one thing to fly without apology. But when power met principle, she found herself writing rules that had never existed, rules that the world desperately needed. The day began with a new initiative. A final one. She called it Every Passenger, a Page, a Storytelling Archive. Every Pinnacle passenger who had ever experienced discrimination, exclusion, or redemption was invited to share their story anonymously or openly. Their stories would be preserved in a digital archive, used in training, and displayed in terminals as part of a rotating series called Voices at Altitude. Why? Because Samantha knew something most CEOs didn't. Policy changes behavior, but stories change hearts. Later that week, she returned to seat 23F this time, on a simulation rig inside the Pinnacle Training Center. It had been turned into a permanent classroom. New recruits sat where once she had been humiliated. She entered the room. Silence fell. Then Samantha said only 2 words. "Teach me." The trainees looked puzzled. She continued, "Before you serve, you must learn to listen. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you feel. And tell me who you think doesn't belong here, so we can unlearn that today." It wasn't a speech. It was a reversal. The woman with all the power had just handed it back to teach responsibility. Jessica Chen, now Samantha's Chief Culture Officer, introduced the final graduation ceremony for the Equity Academy. Each trainee received a boarding pass. But instead of destinations, the passes listed values: compassion, listening, courage, accountability, grace. In the final graduation moment, the lights dimmed. A screen flickered on. And the passengers of Flight 447, the real ones, appeared one by one. Some teary, some remorseful, some grateful. They each said a line. "I saw her. I didn't speak. I learned. I'm different. Thank you." The last to appear was little Marcus, wearing a tie, holding a drawing. "I'm going to build a better airline someday," he said, "but I'm starting with my classroom." The dramatic moral of Samantha's journey wasn't revenge. It wasn't about firing a crew, or building a brand, or punishing a system. It was about proving that silence doesn't protect, dignity doesn't wait, and justice, when it finally boards, flies without apology. At the final keynote of the International Aviation Summit, Samantha delivered her closing remarks. She didn't use a script. She held up her old torn boarding pass, the one Miranda Whitley had ripped in half. "This," she said, "was supposed to tell me I didn't belong. But what it actually taught me was, no one else gets to decide where you land." She closed the speech with one final call. Whatever seat you hold on a plane, in a boardroom, or in your community, ask yourself, are you using it to exclude or to elevate? Back in Detroit, in a modest community center with a flickering neon sign, Angela hung a photo on the wall. It was Samantha standing beside Marcus, both smiling wide. Beneath it, a plaque read, "She never forgot where she boarded. That's why she never left anyone behind." And finally, one quiet morning, Samantha returned to the empty seat 2A. Not in reality, but in a dream. She sat, felt the silence, and imagined every person who had ever felt invisible, unwanted, or unworthy. She whispered, "This seat is yours now. Sit with pride, sit with power, and never, ever move again, because every seat tells a story." This one, it told the world how a single act of injustice was met not with rage, but with reform. And how one black woman turned humiliation into humanity and rewrote aviation history at 30,000 feet. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.